My name is Samuel, and today I want to share a remarkable experience that happened to me and my family. We live in a neighborhood with several simple housing complexes made up of 5-story apartment towers. Our building is the last one in the complex, located next to a high ravine that ends at a busy road. Over time, with each heavy rain, the ravine has been giving way more and more, and some parts of the path that ran behind the wall have completely disappeared. Before, it was still possible to walk there, but now that route has practically disappeared. This situation has two sides. On the one hand, thieves, who used to use the path to break into backyards and steal objects left outside, can no longer pass through there. On the other hand, we, the young people, have lost a useful escape route, especially when we were walking home late at night. Some sections of the wall have even collapsed, increasing the danger as the ravine continues to crumble. I made a point of detailing the place because it is essential to what I'm going to tell you about. My mother worked as a manager of a clothing store in a shopping mall in the city. One day, a young woman started working with her, but it soon became clear that the new employee had difficulty getting along with her colleagues. Despite my mother's efforts to help her fit in, an incident occurred. My mother caught her stealing money from the cash register. With no other alternative, she reported the young woman and had to fire her. The woman reacted badly, threatening my mother, saying that she would regret it and that it would be better to withdraw the accusation. But my mother did not give in. She might even reconsider if the request had been made sincerely, but never in the face of intimidation. After being fired, the young woman swore revenge. That night, my mother became so ill that she began vomiting intensely. When I went to help her, I noticed that the vomit was an unusual green color, as if it were paint. This episode repeated itself on the following nights, always at the same time. She would lock herself in the bathroom, crying in pain and expelling this strange substance. We didn't believe in witchcraft or anything like that, but we began to suspect that the young woman's words had left an impact, perhaps psychological, that was affecting my mother's health. The situation only got worse. My mother had to take a vacation to recover, and her boss, out of sympathy, even gave her another week off. However, instead of getting better, she began to have terrifying visions. She said that she saw a fleshless man in her room who danced, moving his arms up and to the sides. Despite her fear, she refused to let us sleep with her, fearing that what was happening could somehow affect us. The atmosphere at home became unbearable at night. It was as if something terrible was taking over the room. My sister and I created a routine to deal with it. One night, I would go out to sleep at a friend's house while my sister took care of our mother, and the next night we would switch. On one of those nights, I went to a close friend's house and we played video games. Suddenly, I received a call from my sister. She told me that our uncle had come home with a priest and that they were in my mother's room. My sister asked me to come back immediately, but suggested that I avoid the main entrance and try to access the building through the ravine. I told her that this would be impossible, since the path had disappeared, but my friend, who knew the area well, said that it was possible to get through carefully and offered to accompany me. We walked along the ravine until we reached the wall, but it soon became difficult to continue. At one point, the path simply ended, and a hole about 2 meters deep opened up in the ravine. There was no alternative but to climb over the wall and get past a barbed wire fence that the neighbors had put up there. As he helped me climb up, he suddenly shouted, pointing to something on the other side. I looked and saw, right in front of the building, a figure dressed in black. It looked like a woman, and she was dancing exactly as my mother had described the man without flesh. Fear made me almost lose my balance, but I knew I had to keep going. My friend, in a panic, picked up a rock or bottle and threw it at the figure. When the object hit her, she stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and to our horror, began to crawl down the slope unnaturally, like a spider. My heart racing, I ran into the housing complex, avoiding the main entrance and trying to get to my mother's room. There, I found my uncle, the priest, and a woman who had arrived later. They stayed in the house until dawn, and no one noticed that I had left. Later I heard the woman saying that they had sent a dead person to my mother and that it would be difficult to get rid of him as it was something more complex than she was used to dealing with. They scattered salt on the doors and windows. In a moment of distraction, I grabbed some salt and threw it at the wall where I had seen the dancing figure. Over time, my mother recovered and we eventually moved away from the ravine. However, what happened that night has never left my mind. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel for more content like this and share it with your friends. Many more chilling stories are to come.
I want to share an experience that, although it happened many years ago, remains vivid in my memory. It is not something I am proud to remember, but I feel that this is the right time to tell it. Please do not mention my name, but feel free to use the places as references, as they are an essential part of this story. I was 14 years old when it all happened. At that time, I lived in a small town a few kilometers from the capital. My mother worked all day, and I was under the care of my grandmother. Despite all her efforts, my behavior was terrible. I was rebellious, stubborn, and loved to disobey. One of my favorite pastimes was to run away from home without my grandmother noticing. I would ride my bicycle through the nearby colonies, places that, although charming, were not exactly safe, especially at nightfall. There was a disused school in a nearby neighborhood, an old building that, at that time, had not yet been transformed into a historical archive as it is today. Everyone said the place was haunted, but I confess that I never took these stories seriously. For us, children and teenagers, it was just another meeting place. The school was at the end of a long, straight street, lined with tall trees and wide sidewalks, perfect for games and little adventures. Around it, there were huge flower beds, and that was where we used to meet to talk, play ball, or ride our bikes. On a day that seemed like any other, I noticed something strange when I arrived at the flower beds. The place was empty. None of my friends had shown up, and even the usual residents, who usually took advantage of the space to walk or play with their children, were absent. The silence was uncomfortable, and the environment, which had previously seemed welcoming, had a heavy, almost oppressive atmosphere. After a while alone, I finally saw one of my friends arriving. We talked about how strange that emptiness was, and continued with our usual chat. We were distracted, but it didn't take long for something strange to happen. We heard a voice calling us twice, coming from the right side. I thought it was other friends arriving and went to the corner to look, but there was no one. The street, straight and completely visible, was deserted. A few minutes later, we heard the same voice again, but this time it was coming from the opposite direction, from the left side, where there was a mound of dirt blocking the street. We ran to look, and once again, no one. Despite this, we tried to convince ourselves that it was just a bad joke. A few more minutes passed, and the call came again, this time coming from the front of the school. It was impossible to ignore the growing discomfort. It was then that everything changed. The final call came, but this time it seemed to be directly above us. We looked up, and what we saw completely paralyzed us. In the top of one of the trees, there was a female figure. She was in an impossible position, like a lizard stuck to the trunk. Her white dress was dirty, her disheveled hair fell over her face, but what terrified us most were her eyes, fixed, piercing, as if she were ready to jump on us. Without thinking, we screamed and ran in opposite directions. I have no idea where my friend went, but I jumped on my bike and pedaled with all my strength. In my haste, I was almost hit by a bus on a curve. The driver braked suddenly, and I kept pedaling non-stop until I reached my house. There, I burst into tears. My mother, worried, tried to calm me down, but all I could do was tell her, between sobs, what had just happened. I never went back to that place. I lost contact with my friends from back then because in those days we didn't have cell phones, and I didn't bother to write down their phone numbers. The neighborhood where everything happened became a forbidden place for me. Even today, decades later, I avoid going there. Many stories have circulated about that school and its surroundings. Some people said that the spirit of a woman haunted the area. Others mentioned the figure of the weeping woman, who, according to legend, wandered around there because of a river that ran behind the school. I never knew exactly what I saw that night, but one thing is certain: it changed my life. After the incident, I put my adventures and my bike aside. I started spending more time at home, listening to my grandmother and respecting her guidance. My mother always believed that it was a warning, something sent to make me rethink my choices. Maybe it was a witch, as she said, or just a reflection of my behavior, which was asking for a change. This is my story. I hope it serves as a warning or inspiration to whoever is listening. I thank you for allowing me to share it. During a long, lonely trip I took, I experienced something I will never forget. I had just visited my late husband's family in a remote region, right on the opposite side of the country's northern border. My home is in a more central area, but due to security and the weather, I planned the trip to cross the United States, taking a long route that involved passing through several cities. The trip there was peaceful, even monotonous, but on the way back, something unexpected happened. I was already many miles from home when I began to feel strangely unwell. Consulting the map, I realized that I still had a long way to go until the next large urban center, where I could rest and eat something. The malaise did not go away, and it seemed like a wave of anxiety was about to overcome me. I decided to stop at a small motel on the side of the road. The place, in the middle of nowhere, had that classic American movie feel, and I immediately thought that, at the very least, it would make for a story to tell later. The young man who greeted me seemed friendly, but I noticed something curious. He had features that reminded me of someone from southern Mexico, although he didn't speak Spanish. The motel's decor also caught my attention. There were paintings and ornaments that reminded me of wooded landscapes, similar to the illustrations in my childhood school books. However, 3 old portraits hanging in the hallway seemed out of place. I didn't look at them much, but I felt that there was something strange there. Once in the room, I lay down and quickly fell asleep, exhausted. The rest, however, didn't last long. I woke up suddenly, plunged into total darkness. For a few seconds, I was disoriented, not knowing where I was. A strange sensation took hold of me, as if I wasn't alone. When I looked to the corner of the room, I saw something that looked like a silhouette, sitting in a chair near the bathroom door. Dressed in black, the figure was motionless. My heart raced, but when I turned on the light, I realized that there was nothing there. The feeling of uneasiness, however, continued. I left the room in search of something to eat and took the opportunity to go to the reception. There, I noticed the paintings in the hallway again, but something was different. The images, which had previously looked like portraits of people, were now just textures, as if the figures had disappeared. I found it strange, but I preferred not to think too much about it. I returned to the room, still intrigued, and programmed the television to turn off automatically at midnight. I planned to get enough rest to resume the trip at dawn. During the night, I had a dream that seemed extremely real. I was in an open field with trees in the background, but something there made me feel threatened. As I approached the trees, I saw women dressed in black. They watched me in an intimidating way, and fear took hold of me. When I finally realized I was dreaming, I tried to wake up. I opened my eyes, but the restlessness persisted. I looked at the clock, 3:35 in the morning. When I turned to the wall, I saw the silhouette of someone standing next to the bed again. My body seemed paralyzed, and I couldn't move. With effort, I reached out to turn on the light, and once again the figure disappeared. Something about that room wasn't right. On the wall, I saw a painting I hadn't noticed before. It showed 3 women in black in an open field, exactly like in my dream. I couldn't sleep anymore. Before 5 o'clock, I got up, packed my things, and went to hand in the key at the reception. The woman who was there, unlike the young man who had helped me the night before, seemed to be her mother. She asked if I had had a bad night, and I mentioned the nightmares, so I took the opportunity to ask about the women in the photographs. She smiled strangely and said that many people believed they were witches. According to local history, those women had owned the land a long time ago, and some say they still roam the area. Hearing this, a shiver ran down my spine. I quickly thanked her and left as quickly as I could. When I got into the car and put it in gear, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. The paintings in the hallway, which had previously been empty, now showed the figures of women again. I didn't have the courage to look for long and drove away without looking back. To this day, when I tell this story, many say that the motel staff must have been joking, but I know what I felt. There was something or someone in that room with me. The presence was palpable, something that left a deep impression on me. Since then, any mention of witches causes me inexplicable discomfort, and I try my best to avoid remembering that night.